His screams echoed through the corridors of Mount Sinai Hospital at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Nurses rushed past bewildered family members as the smell hit them first, a putrid, sickening odor that made seasoned medical professionals gag and cover their faces. Inside room 314, 42-year-old businessman Robert Miller writhed in agony as his flesh literally rotted before the doctor's eyes. His skin had turned a mottled gray-black, peeling away in chunks that fell onto the sterile white sheets below. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, had seen thousands of cases in her 15-year career, but nothing had prepared her for this. His body was rotting alive, she would later testify, but this wasn't an ordinary infection. It was something no doctor in America could explain. Blood tests came back normal. Cultures showed nothing. X-rays revealed healthy bones beneath the decaying tissue. Every medical explanation failed as Robert's condition accelerated at an impossible rate. His family watched helplessly as the man who had built a multi-million-dollar timber empire, who had traveled to over 30 countries, who had seemed invincible just weeks before, dissolved into something unrecognizable. But here's what the doctors didn't know yet. Here's what would send chills down their spines when they finally uncovered the truth. It all began with two mysterious women thousands of miles away in the markets of Accra, Ghana. Women whose names Robert whispered in his delirium. Women who had vanished without a trace the morning after he met them. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Robert Miller wasn't just any businessman. He was the kind of man who built empires from nothing, who took risks that made other entrepreneurs nervous, who lived life like every day was his last chance to make another million. At 42, he owned timber yards across 3 states, drove a Tesla Model S, and had properties in Miami and Manhattan. But beneath the success lay a darker pattern. Failed marriages, risky business deals, and a lifestyle that pushed every boundary. His friends knew Robert loved to mix business with pleasure during his international trips. What they didn't know was that his latest journey to Ghana would be his final gamble. The questions that haunted investigators were simple, yet terrifying. Was this a disease science had never seen before? Was it some form of biological weapon? A curse placed by those he had wronged? Why did his body decay so rapidly that doctors couldn't even slow the process? Who were the 2 women witnesses claimed to have seen him with in Accra? And why did every person who tried to track them down hit dead ends, as if they had never existed at all? Hospital security footage would later show Robert in his final conscious moments, screaming not in English, but in what linguists identified as fragments of Twi, a Ghanaian language he had never studied. His ex-wife, Jennifer, sat by his bedside recording his delirious words on her phone, hoping doctors could find clues in his rambling. What she captured would become evidence in one of the most disturbing medical mysteries in recent American history. To understand what happened to Robert Miller, you need to understand who Robert Miller was. Born in suburban Detroit to middle-class parents, Robert showed an entrepreneurial edge from age 12 when he started buying broken bicycles, fixing them, and selling them for triple the price. By 18, he had saved enough to buy his first lumber truck. By 25, he owned Miller Timber Solutions, supplying hardwood to construction companies across the Midwest. By 35, he was worth $8 million and had expanded internationally, but success came with a price. Robert's first marriage to college sweetheart Lisa ended when she discovered his affairs during business trips to South America. His second marriage to Jennifer, a successful attorney, lasted longer but crumbled under the weight of his increasingly reckless behavior. Robert was brilliant in business, Jennifer later told investigators, but he thought rules didn't apply to him. Not business rules, not marriage rules, not any rules. He lived like he was untouchable. His friends painted a similar picture. Marcus, his business partner for over a decade, described Robert as magnetic but dangerous. Robert could charm anyone into anything. He'd walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 3 new deals and 2 new girlfriends. He was addictive to be around, but exhausting too. You always felt like you were on the edge of something amazing or something terrible when you were with him. This pattern extended to his international business dealings. Robert had been investigated twice by federal authorities for questionable timber sourcing practices in Brazil and Cambodia, though charges were never filed. His assistant, Maria, kept detailed records of his travels for tax purposes. Between 2019 and 2024, Robert had made 47 international trips for business: Brazil 17 times, Thailand 8 times, Ghana. This was his 4th visit. Each trip followed the same pattern according to his credit card statements and emails Maria had access to. Days filled with meetings, site visits, and contract negotiations. Nights filled with expensive restaurants, exclusive clubs, and what his expense reports euphemistically called client entertainment. The Ghana trips were different, though. On his previous 3 visits, Robert had been unusually secretive. He would disappear for hours without explanation, something completely out of character for a man who documented every business expense and meeting minute. Maria noticed charges on his corporate card for establishments that didn't exist when she tried to verify them later. Hotels that had no record of his stays, restaurants that weren't listed in any business directory. When she asked Robert about these discrepancies, he laughed them off. "African bookkeeping is different, Maria. Don't worry about it." Everyone knew Robert loved to take risks. In business, he would invest millions in deals others considered too dangerous. In his personal life, he skydived, mountain climbed, and dated women half his age without caring what people thought. His motto, printed on business cards he handed out at networking events, read, "Fortune favors the bold." But none of his friends, none of his business associates, none of his family members imagined this would be his last risk. None of them imagined that his boldness would lead to something that medical science still cannot fully explain. Robert's 4th trip to Ghana began like all the others. He flew first class from JFK to Kotoka International Airport on March 15, 2024, carrying contracts worth $12 million for sustainable mahogany sourcing. The first 3 days proceeded according to schedule. Meetings with government officials, site visits to timber yards outside Kumasi, dinners with local business partners who praised his commitment to ethical forestry practices. Robert's emails to Maria during this period were professional, upbeat, and detailed. He was closing the biggest deal of his career. But on March 18th, something shifted. His last business meeting ended at 4 p.m., leaving him with a free evening in Accra before his flight home the next afternoon. Instead of returning to his 5-star hotel as planned, Robert decided to explore the city's nightlife. This decision, this single choice to venture into unfamiliar territory, would change everything. He took a taxi to Osu, the bustling entertainment district where neon lights reflected off wet streets and the sound of high-life music spilled from dozens of clubs and bars. The Golden Palm Club was exactly the kind of place Robert gravitated toward when he traveled alone. Upscale but edgy, expensive but authentic, filled with locals and expatriates who looked like they had stories worth hearing. He ordered his usual drink, 18-year-old Glenfiddich on the rocks, and settled into a corner booth to observe the crowd. The club pulsed with energy, professional women in designer dresses mixed with businessmen in perfectly tailored suits. The air was thick with perfume, cigarette smoke, and the kind of electric tension that comes when ambitious people gather after dark. That's when he saw them. 2 women sitting at the bar, their backs to him, but something about their presence commanded attention. The first woman, who would later be identified only as Amma, had golden braids that caught the club's colored lights like fiber-optic cables. She wore a red dress that hugged her curves and laughed in a way that made other conversations pause. The second woman, Ifua, was her opposite. Quiet where Amma was loud, still where Amma gestured wildly, mysterious where Amma was an open book. Ifua's eyes, when she finally turned to scan the room, seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. Robert, never one to hesitate when he wanted something, approached their table within minutes. "Mind if I buy you ladies a drink?" he asked with the confidence that had closed $1,000 deals and conquered boardrooms across 3 continents. Amma smiled immediately, her teeth perfect white against her dark skin. "American businessman," she said to Afua in English, though they had been speaking Twi moments before. "They always want to buy drinks." But she gestured to the empty chair, and Robert sat down. The conversation flowed easily. Amma worked in fashion, designing clothes for Ghana's growing middle class. Afua said little about her work, only that she helped people with traditional problems. Robert found himself drawn into their orbit despite feeling slightly off balance. These weren't the usual women he met in hotel bars or business dinners. They seemed to know things about him he hadn't mentioned. Amma commented on his expensive watch, a Rolex Submariner, asking if he always wore it when he traveled. Afua asked about his family, somehow knowing he was divorced before he had mentioned it. Hours passed. The club began to empty, but Robert felt wide awake, energized in a way he hadn't experienced in years. When Amma suggested they continue the evening somewhere more private, he agreed without hesitation. They left together in a taxi that took them through winding streets Robert didn't recognize, past markets that were closed for the night, until they arrived at a small guest house tucked away from the main roads. The building was older than the hotels Robert usually frequented, with carved wooden details and traditional Akan symbols decorating the entrance. Afua produced a key and led them inside. The room was dimly lit by candles, furnished with authentic Ghanaian textiles and artifacts that seemed to watch from the shadows. Incense burned in corners, filling the air with scents Robert couldn't identify. As the night progressed, Robert felt increasingly disoriented. The room seemed to shift and move around him. Amma's laughter echoed strangely off the walls. Afua's eyes reflected the candlelight in ways that seemed impossible. What happened in that room would follow him back across the ocean, back to his life in America, back to the hospital bed where doctors would struggle to save his life. The details remained fragmented in Robert's memory, whispered words in languages he didn't understand, rituals that felt ancient and powerful, and a burning sensation that started in his chest and spread through his entire body like liquid fire. When he woke the next morning, alone in the guest house with sunlight streaming through windows he didn't remember seeing the night before, Robert felt changed. Not just physically, though there was a strange burning sensation on his skin, but fundamentally altered in ways he couldn't articulate. He tried to find Amma and Afua before his flight, but the guest house owner claimed not to know them. The taxi driver from the night before couldn't be located. Even the Golden Palm Club's bartender insisted no 2 women matching their description had been there the previous evening. It was as if they had never existed. The next morning, as Robert boarded his flight back to JFK, he felt the strange burning sensation intensify. But he ignored it, chalking it up to too much whiskey and too little sleep. He had no way of knowing that the burning was just the beginning. If you're still with me, type "I'm still here" in the comments so I know you're locked in. Robert's collapse happened exactly 72 hours after he landed at JFK. He was in his Manhattan office, reviewing the Ghana contracts with his legal team, when the pain hit him like a physical blow. It started in his chest, the same burning sensation he'd felt in Accra, but amplified 100-fold. Within minutes, it spread through his torso, down his arms, up his neck. He fell from his chair, convulsing as his assistant called 911. By the time paramedics arrived, Robert's skin had begun to change color. The emergency room at Mount Sinai had seen everything from drug overdoses to exotic parasites brought back by international travelers. But when Robert was wheeled in, the attending physician immediately called for isolation protocols. His skin was turning gray-black in patches, starting from his chest and spreading outward like ink through water. The smell was overwhelming, sweet and putrid, like rotting fruit mixed with burnt metal. More disturbing still, the affected areas were hot to the touch, as if something was burning him from the inside out. Dr. Sarah Chen, the hospital's chief infectious disease specialist, was called in within the hour. Her first instinct was necrotizing fasciitis, the flesh-eating bacteria that could destroy tissue at terrifying speed. But the bacterial cultures came back negative. Blood work showed no signs of infection. CT scans revealed organs that appeared perfectly healthy despite the external decay. It was like his body was betraying itself, Dr. Chen later explained in medical journals. Every test we ran contradicted what we were seeing with our own eyes. The medical team expanded their search. Tropical disease specialists flew in from the CDC in Atlanta. Toxicology experts tested for every known poison and chemical agent. Dermatologists examined tissue samples under electron microscopes, searching for parasites, fungi, or bacterial infections they might have missed. Every test came back normal. Every culture grew nothing. Every scan showed a healthy man whose skin was dying while he watched. Meanwhile, news of Robert's condition leaked to the media. Hospital staff, despite strict confidentiality agreements, couldn't resist sharing details of the most unusual case they'd ever encountered. Within days, New York tabloids were running headlines about the flesh-eating curse and the mystery disease that doctors can't cure. Social media exploded with theories ranging from biological weapons to supernatural revenge. Robert's ex-wife Jennifer found herself surrounded by reporters asking if her former husband had enemies, if he'd been involved in anything illegal, if she believed in curses. The investigation began officially when the CDC classified Robert's case as a potential public health emergency. Agent Thomas Rodriguez from the CDC's Epidemic Intelligence Service was assigned to trace Robert's movements and identify possible sources of contamination. Rodriguez was a methodical man who had tracked outbreaks from Ebola in Africa to MERS in the Middle East. He approached Robert's case like any other medical mystery: gather facts, eliminate variables, find the source. Rodriguez's investigation revealed the pattern. Robert's recent travel history showed 4 trips to Ghana over 2 years, always for legitimate business purposes, always lasting 5 to 7 days. But the details didn't add up. Hotel records showed Robert checking out a full day before his scheduled flights on 3 occasions. Car rental agencies had no record of vehicles rented under his name, despite his credit card showing charges for transportation. Most puzzling, Robert's business contacts in Ghana insisted they hadn't seen him outside of scheduled meetings, yet his phone's GPS data showed him in parts of Accra they claimed he'd never visited. The breakthrough came when Rodriguez interviewed Kwame Asante, a Ghanaian timber broker who had worked with Robert on previous deals. Asante was reluctant to speak at first, claiming cultural differences made certain topics difficult to discuss with Americans. But when Rodriguez showed him photos of Robert's condition, Asante's demeanor changed completely. "This is not a disease," he said quietly. "This is punishment. Your friend, he went places he should not have gone. He met people he should not have met. In Ghana, we have old ways of dealing with men who take what is not theirs." When pressed for details, Asante described a shadow economy in Accra, where traditional healers and spiritual practitioners operated alongside modern businesses. Some women, he explained, were known to possess abilities that went beyond normal human understanding. They could attract men irresistibly, but the price for their company was steep. "American men come to Ghana thinking their money makes them kings," Asante told Rodriguez. "They do not understand that some things cannot be bought, only earned or punished." Rodriguez documented everything, but his superiors at the CDC grew uncomfortable with the supernatural implications. They wanted medical explanations, not folklore. They wanted bacterial agents, not spiritual retribution. The investigation stalled as Robert's condition worsened. By his 10th day in the hospital, the decay had spread to cover 60% of his body. Doctors performed emergency surgeries to remove dead tissue, but healthy skin turned gray-black within hours of each procedure. It was as if his body had forgotten how to heal itself. Robert's family gathered around his bed, watching helplessly as he faded in and out of consciousness. His brother Michael flew in from California, his sister Sarah from Texas. Jennifer, despite their bitter divorce, never left his side. They took turns holding his hand, though the nurses warned them about potential contamination. During his lucid moments, Robert spoke in fragments about the women in Ghana. "They warned me," he whispered to Jennifer. "I thought it was a game. I thought they were just being dramatic." When she asked what they had warned him about, he would only shake his head and mumble words in languages she didn't recognize. By the third week, Robert's case had attracted international attention. Medical journals were publishing preliminary reports. Documentary filmmakers were requesting interviews. Religious leaders from various faiths offered prayers and explanations. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source: Dr. Akosua Mensah, a Ghanaian physician who had completed her residency at Johns Hopkins before returning to practice in Accra. Dr. Mensah contacted the CDC after seeing news coverage of Robert's case. She claimed to have encountered similar symptoms before, always in foreign men who had spent time in certain parts of Accra. "The medical community in Ghana knows about these cases," she explained during a video conference with Robert's treatment team. "We don't discuss them in international forums because Western medicine has no framework for understanding what we observe, but we see this perhaps 3 or 4 times per year. Always men, always foreigners, always after they have encountered certain women in the traditional healing community." Dr. Mensah described previous cases with eerie similarities to Robert's condition. A German businessman in 2019 who died within 2 weeks of returning from Ghana. A British oil executive in 2021 who survived but required multiple skin grafts and psychological counseling. A French diplomat in 2023 who recovered physically but suffered complete memory loss about his time in Ghana. In each case, the men had met women who fit the same description: one outgoing and charming, one quiet and mysterious. In each case, the women vanished without trace after their encounter. The twist that shook the medical team came when Dr. Mensah revealed her investigation into these cases. She had spent years trying to track down the women involved, working with traditional healers and spiritual practitioners throughout Ghana. What she discovered challenged every scientific principle she had learned in medical school. "There are women in Ghana," she explained carefully, "who practice traditional medicine in ways that go beyond herbs and rituals. They claim to carry powers inherited through family lines dating back centuries, powers that can punish unfaithful men or men who abuse women's trust." During Robert's 4th week in the hospital, Dr. Mensah traveled to New York to examine him personally. What she found confirmed her suspicions. The pattern of decay followed specific paths across Robert's body, creating symbols she recognized from traditional Akan spiritual practices. "This is not random tissue death," she told Dr. Chen. "This follows the map of a punishment ritual. His body is responding to something that was done to him, not something that infected him." The revelation that changed everything came from Robert himself during one of his final lucid conversations. Jennifer was recording again, hoping to capture something that might help the doctors, when Robert began speaking clearly for the first time in days. "They asked me about my wives," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About the women I had hurt. About the children I never had because I was too selfish to be a real husband. Ifua, the quiet one, she touched my chest and said my heart was empty. Said empty hearts become empty bodies. I laughed at her, Jennifer. I thought it was just talk." But then Robert revealed details that made Jennifer's blood run cold. The women had known things about him that no one in Ghana should have known. Details about his divorces, about affairs his own family didn't know about business deals he'd made that hurt small communities in Brazil and Cambodia. "They knew everything," Robert whispered. "Every woman I'd lied to, every promise I'd broken, every time I'd chosen money over people. It was like they could see my whole life, just by looking at me." The medical mystery was becoming something else entirely, something that challenged the boundary between science and belief, between medicine and ancient wisdom. Dr. Chen found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about healing and disease. How could 2 women thousands of miles away affect a man's body in ways that modern medicine couldn't even slow down? Was there something in human consciousness, in guilt and spiritual accountability, that could manifest as physical illness? The experimental surgery took place on Robert's 28th day in the hospital. Dr. Chen and her team attempted to remove all affected tissue and perform extensive skin grafts using healthy skin from unaffected areas of his body. The procedure lasted 9 hours and required 47 units of blood products. For 6 hours after surgery, Robert's vital signs remained stable. The grafts appeared to be taking. His family allowed themselves to hope. But at 3:17 a.m., exactly the same time he had first arrived at the emergency room 4 weeks earlier, Robert's condition catastrophically deteriorated. The healthy skin grafts began turning gray-black within minutes. His temperature spiked to 108 degrees Fahrenheit. His heart rate became irregular. Most disturbing of all, he became conscious and alert, staring at the ceiling with wide eyes as his body continued its impossible decay. Jennifer was at his bedside when he spoke his final words. She had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed when his voice woke her. "Jennifer," he said clearly, though his lips were barely moving, "tell them I understand now. Tell them the women were right. Some things can't be forgiven by saying sorry. Some debts follow you across oceans." He turned his head to look directly at her, and for a moment his eyes were completely clear, more lucid than they had been in weeks. "I hurt so many people thinking I could always fix it later with money or charm, but some wounds don't heal. Some promises matter more than profits." At 4:23 a.m. on April 15, 2024, Robert Miller's heart stopped. The decay process halted immediately, as if whatever force had been consuming him simply withdrew. Dr. Chen later described it as the most peaceful death she had witnessed, despite the horrific circumstances leading up to it. One moment he was fighting for every breath, the next moment he was gone. It was as if he had finally surrendered to something he'd been battling his entire life. The investigation into Robert's death continued for months after his passing. Agent Rodriguez traveled to Ghana 3 times, working with local authorities to locate Ama and Afua. Security cameras from the Golden Palm Club confirmed they had been there on March 18th, but the footage was too grainy to identify them clearly. The guest house where Robert claimed to have spent the night with them had no registration records, no payment receipts, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. More disturbing still, Rodriguez discovered that similar cases had been reported across West Africa for decades. Men from wealthy Western countries who returned home with mysterious illnesses that defied medical explanation. The cases were scattered across different countries, different time periods, but the pattern remained consistent. Successful, wealthy men, extramarital encounters during business trips, rapid physical decay that killed them within weeks of returning home. Dr. Mensah's research revealed something that made the medical establishment uncomfortable. Traditional healers throughout Ghana spoke of women who served as guardians, protectors of their communities, against men who exploited or abused women's trust. These women, according to local beliefs, could mark unfaithful men with consequences that followed them anywhere in the world. Modern medicine wants to understand everything through bacteria and viruses, Dr. Mensah explained to confused American colleagues. But what if consciousness itself can become toxic? What if guilt and spiritual debt can manifest as physical illness? To this day, no medical explanation fully accounts for Robert's rapid decay. The CDC closed his case as an unknown tropical disease, but privately, investigators remain baffled. The tissue samples taken during his treatment continue to test negative for all known pathogens. His medical records have become the subject of quiet discussion in infectious disease circles, passed around like folklore among doctors who pride themselves on scientific rationality. The women in Ghana vanished without a trace. Local authorities found no record of them in any database. The Golden Palm Club's management insisted they had never seen them before Robert's visit. The guest house owner denied renting rooms to anyone matching their description. It was as if they had materialized specifically to encounter Robert, then dissolved back into the shadows they came from. Robert Miller thought he was untouchable. He had built an empire from nothing, survived 2 divorces, weathered federal investigations, and conquered markets across 3 continents. He lived by the belief that money could solve any problem, charm could open any door, and consequences were just obstacles for people without enough resources to overcome them. But in the end, his choices caught up with him in a way that science still cannot explain. Whether you call it karma, spiritual justice, or an unknown medical phenomenon, something fundamental in the universe seemed to demand payment for a lifetime of broken promises and exploited trust. The question that haunts everyone who knew Robert's story is simple but profound. Was this truly a medical mystery, or was it justice delivered through means that Western science refuses to acknowledge? Can spiritual debt manifest as physical illness? Can the pain we cause others somehow return to consume our own bodies? Robert's case challenges everything we think we know about cause and effect, about science and spirituality, about the connection between moral choices and physical consequences. Think about Robert's story for a moment. Think about the women in your own life who have trusted you with their hearts, their bodies, their futures. Think about the promises you've made and kept, and the promises you've broken. Think about the times you've chosen your own interests over someone else's well-being, your own pleasure over someone else's pain. How would you feel if you knew that every choice had consequences that could follow you anywhere, that could manifest in ways you never imagined possible? Do you believe this was a medical mystery that science will eventually solve, or was it truly a curse that medicine could never cure? What's your take on the connection between spiritual accountability and physical health? Have you ever experienced consequences that seemed to come from nowhere, that felt like the universe was somehow balancing the scales? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and some of your insights might shape future stories. And if you thought this case was disturbing, wait until you hear about the man who survived 17 stab wounds only to discover his attacker was closer than he imagined. It's a story that will make you question everyone you trust, everyone you let into your home, everyone you believe loves you unconditionally. If this story gripped you, hit like, share it with someone who appreciates mysteries that challenge what we think we know about reality, and subscribe because you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, remember that every choice has consequences, and some debts follow us farther than we ever imagined possible.